this off. Good morning, everyone. Before we begin class this morning, Jerry, would you start us off with a word of prayer?
Great Heavenly Father, thank you for this moment in time that we come to you and worship and learn more about your word. Help those who are less fortunate than we. We pray to you to the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Okay, we're in the book of Leviticus. And in chapter 1, we studied about burnt offerings. And in chapter 2, we studied about grain offerings. And this morning, we're going to go into chapter 3, which is about peace offerings. And there's actually quite a bit of stuff to study on peace offerings. What I'm going to do is we're going to go through chapter 3 and discuss it some. And there's a lot more information in Leviticus chapter 7, and there's information, and I think it's Numbers 15. There's a lot of places that talks about peace offerings, because what we got here in chapter 3 is only a part of it. It's not the whole thing. We'll try to put all this together. But this morning we're going to go through chapter 3 and discuss it some, and then when we have time, if we have time, we'll go on to Leviticus 7 and discuss some more details about the peace offering. So, one thing about the peace offering is that everybody involved gets a portion of it. The one that's offering the offering gets a portion of what's offered. The priest gets a portion of what's offered. And God, of course, gets a portion of what's offered. So all three parties in the peace offering get a part of the offering. Let's start off this morning. We're going to read Leviticus 3 and the first 2 verses. Leviticus 3, verses 1 and 2. Joanna, would you read that?
When his offering is the sacrifice of a peace offering, if he offers it of the herd, whether male or female, he should offer it without blemish before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand on the head of his offering and kill it at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And Aaron's sons, the priests, shall sprinkle the blood all around the altar.
Okay. An offering of the herd without blemish. And they were to lay their hands on the head of the offering and kill it at the door of the tabernacle, and the priest would take the blood and sprinkle it all around the altar. Does that kind of sound familiar? Like the burnt offering? But there's something different here, not like the burnt offering. What's different here? Yes. In the burnt offering, it was a male only. And here we see in verse 1, whether male or female. So it was up to the one giving the offering to decide whether it wants male or female. And I'm not into livestock, so I wouldn't know, but I'm guessing if they had a choice, they would probably give the male, because the female's the one that has the offspring that can keep producing for them. But anyway, here, and the peace offering can be either male or female. Everything else we talked about was the same as the burnt offering. But when we say herd, what's it referring to?
What?
Herd.
Bird? The group.
What kind of animal is it talking about?
Cow.
Yeah, it's talking about cattle. We talked about that before, herd and flock. Herd is cattle. So sacrifice of the peace offering, it's from the herd, so it's cattle, and it can be male or female, and it was to be without blemish. And again, laid their hand on the head of the animal, and then killed it at the door of the tabernacle, and then the blood was, then the priest, the one that did all that work, the one that laid his hand on it, and the one that was to kill the offering at the door of the tabernacle, was the one offering the offering. Then the priest took the blood and sprinkled it all around the altar. Jerry, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm wondering, if the, without blemish, that's male or female?
Yes.
Okay.
Where was this to be offered?
Which one? You're in chapter 1 or chapter 2?
Chapter 3. In chapter 3. Actually, 1 or 3, it's the same. But
It says at the door of the tabernacle,
which is where?
the meeting place.
The meeting place. Okay. The reason I'm asking that because I don't know why. Before we got into this study of the tabernacle and everything that's going through the old law, myself, maybe you weren't that way, maybe it was just me. I assumed that in the courtyard, the Israelites didn't even get to go in the courtyard. That's incorrect. What we're reading about is they took their offering inside the courtyard. They went through the screen, what they call the screen, right? The door of the courtyard. They went through the screen into the courtyard, because where was the altar of burnt offering? In the courtyard. So they went into the courtyard near the door of the tabernacle, the sanctuary. That's where they killed this animal. They were inside that courtyard that had the 150 feet by 75 feet, I think is what it was. They're inside that courtyard. The Israelite, not the priest and the Levites, the one that's offering is in there next to the altar doing this. Carl, you had a comment?
According to this, the guy that's making the offer, he had to kill the animal.
Yes.
Then the priest took over after that.
Well, we're not done with what the guy that's offering is going to do, but we have seen so far, well, the burnt offering, who did most of the work? The one offering it, didn't he? He had to get everything ready, and then he gave it to the priest, and then they put it on the altar. Grain offering, they had to bring all the stuff. Of course, the priest got a handful, and we've already discussed the grain offering, but here, yes, the one offering was to bring the animal, and the one offering was to kill the animal at the door of the tabernacle of meeting, which is inside the courtyard. If we look at same chapter 3, if you look at verse 8, so which is a different offering, which we're going to discuss a little bit, but it says before the tabernacle of meeting, and in verse 13 it says the same thing, before, in other words, in front of the tabernacle, which is the same as being by the door of the tabernacle, right? And then we were discussing in chapter 1 about the burnt offering. In verse 3, it also said the door of the tabernacle. But let's go back and read now Leviticus 1 and verse 5. And Terry, would you read that? Leviticus 1 verse 5.
And he shall kill the bullock before the Lord, and the priests, Aaron's sons, shall bring the blood, and sprinkle the blood around about upon the altar that is by the door of the tabernacle of the congregation.
Okay, now the altar of burnt offering was in the courtyard, and that's the altar we're talking about. And here it's described as by the door of the tabernacle of meeting. So when we're talking about the person offering these offerings, they're somewhere there by the altar, right? But specifically, when we talked in chapter 1, Again, talking about the burnt offering from the flock. Let's read verse 11. Here, God was very specific. Up to this point, we've seen at the door of the tabernacle, at the door of the tabernacle, before the tabernacle, which means by it. But when it talks about the flocks, let's read verse 11. Leviticus 1, verse 11. Michelle, would you read that?
He shall kill it on the north side of the altar before the Lord, and the priests, Aaron's sons, shall sprinkle its blood all around on the altar.
Okay, here, when it comes to the flock and the burnt offering, God specifically said that they were to do so on the north side of the altar. I thought that was interesting. All these other offerings we've read about just says at the door of the tabernacle or by the tabernacle, you might say. Here specifically, they were told to do it on the north side of the altar, and I thought that was interesting. Anyway, like I said, I bring all this up because in my mind, I was thinking the Israelites did not go into the courtyard, and that was incorrect. They do go into the courtyard. They're the one that does a lot of work here on these offerings, aren't they? They're the one that brought the animal and killed it and different things that we're going to read about here this morning. And we've already read about it in chapter 1, but they did go into the courtyard. So, but they weren't allowed into the sanctuary, the actual tabernacle. Who could go into the tabernacle? Well, also, would the Levites have to go in? When they take it up and take it down, the Levites would have gone in also, right? Now, they couldn't touch the furniture until Aaron and his sons wrapped it all up, but the Levites would have gone in. And so, yes, the Levites, when they're putting it together and taking it apart, the Levites would have had to go in and do their work. But most of the time, who went into the sanctuary was the priests. Correct, Chris? I'm not messing up. I don't know, it was just in my mind that the Israelites didn't go into the courtyard, but that was incorrect. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that just in case. Let's turn and read now from Leviticus 17. And let's read the first 4 verses. Like I said, there's a lot of information here about the peace offerings actually. In chapter 3, chapter 7, there's actually some here even in chapter 17. But Leviticus 17, we're going to read the first 4 verses. And Merwin, would you read that?
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto Aaron and unto his sons and unto all the children of Israel, and say unto them, This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded, saying, What man soever there be of the house of Israel that killeth an ox or lamb or goat in the camp, or that killeth it out of the camp, and bringeth it not unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation to offer an offering unto the Lord before the tabernacle of the Lord, blood shall be imputed upon that man. He hath shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people.
So were they required to take their offering to the door of the tabernacle? Could they kill it in the camp or kill it outside of camp? No. They did not have that choice. And if they did, they were cut off. So again, God is very specific, wasn't he? When we're talking about the old law, there was a lot of things here, and it was tough for them to do what they had to do. And Chris has already brought up, with the amount of people the Israelites had, those priests were busy all the time, weren't they? But again, God was very specific. The Israelites couldn't say we didn't know what to do because God always told them. But in case you didn't understand that part, same chapter, chapter 17, let's read verses 8 and 9. And Tina, would you read that? Leviticus 17, verses 8 and 9.
And thou shalt say unto them, Whatsoever man there be of the house of Israel, or of the strangers which sojourn among you, that offered a burnt offering or sacrifice, and bringeth it not unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, to offer it unto the Lord, even that man shall be cut off
from among his people.
Okay. What does that mean? We talked about this before. What does it mean to be cut off? Does that mean he's shunned?
Put to death.
Yeah, exactly. It means he was put to death. If they killed an animal in camp or killed it outside of camp and tried to make an offering, bring that offering to the priest after it was already dead, the penalty was death. That's not the way God wanted it. So anyway, when we talk about this, I just wanted to bring that up because like I said, I had it in my head. They couldn't go into the courtyard, but yes, they were commanded to take their offering into the courtyard. So maybe that's why when we think about when we talked about the tabernacle in the courtyard, there's hangings all the way around the courtyard, remember? About 7.5 feet high. Maybe that's why God made it that way. So when someone goes in to offer their offering, you don't have a bunch of people gather around watching you do this, or well, you shouldn't have killed it that way, or you shouldn't have done this, or whatever. When they went into that courtyard, it was them and the priests and God doing their thing. So you can see the wisdom of how God built the tabernacle and why the courtyard was made the way it was. Or at least it seems that way to me. Any comments on this morning then? Nobody else? I was the only one that thought that the Israelites couldn't go in the courtyard? Okay. That's okay. Let's go back to chapter 3. Yeah, Carl, do you have a comment?
Yeah, over here in chapter 17, you get into how important the blood was in God's sight. And even in the New Testament, they were told when they were preaching that they would abstain from eating blood. So this is still in effect today. We shouldn't be eating any blood sausage. Because a lot of people do, even today.
My mom has talked about growing up in Texas, blood pudding. I don't even know what it is, but you know what? It doesn't sound very good to me. Maybe it would to somebody else, but you don't have to tell me not to, because I'm like, no, that's okay. But anyway, yes, we're going to talk about the blood a little bit later this morning, some more, but let's continue on. Go ahead.
One thing you said that were you the only one that thought about the courtyard? You could go in whatever at one point. You may have been, I don't know, I didn't. But the thing it is, it emphasizes the fact there's a whole bunch of rules that were put forth. And it was very specific about what needed to be done. And I think it more or less emphasizes that, what you're saying. Just like today, there's a whole bunch of things you might say, I gotta do that. Answer is yes. Just like it was then. What was the punishment? Death.
Well, we talked.
See a bunch of us dropping dead on the same time. Talking eternal.
Yes, that's why we're studying all this, isn't it? To learn. I mean, when we talked about the priests and their duties. If they didn't do it correctly, what was the penalty? Death. Here, if they didn't take the odd animal and offer it the way God wanted them to, even the Israelites themselves, what was the penalty here? If they offered it, if they tried to kill the animal and take it apart, slaughter it somewhere else and bring it to the priest, what was the penalty? Death. So is God serious about this? If we make a mistake and we don't follow God's law today, what's our penalty? Spiritual death. It's still death, isn't it? That penalty is still there. Go ahead, Chris.
Shows that intention is not enough. Because if they have the good intention of, well, we're gonna offer the sacrifice. We do want to worship God. We're just not gonna do it this way. We're gonna do it that way instead. But we're still worshiping God. We're still offering the sacrifice. The intention behind it is not enough to justify doing things differently.
Right. Well, like we were saying, and you've brought up before, priests were very busy. Man, I don't get to go in for another couple hours to do my offering. I think I'll just kill it right now. That way it's ready. We'll speed up the process. Maybe, like Chris said, they might have a good intention, but it doesn't matter. your intentions. You got to do it the way God says. Matthew 7, they were condemned. Lord, Lord, haven't we done all these great things? Well, they thought it was good, but not God didn't. he was unhappy with them because they weren't following his law. So it's not our intent. You got to follow God's law. Okay, continuing on here in Leviticus chapter 3, still talking about sacrifice of peace offering from the herd, so cattle. Let's read verses 3 through 5. Leviticus 3, verses 3 through 5. And Thad, would you read those?
If his obligation be a sacrifice of peace offering, be offered to another earth, whether it be male or female, you shall offer without blemish from the Lord. He shall lay his hand upon the head of the offering, kill it at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. Aaron's sons and priests shall sprinkle the blood above the altar round about. And he shall offer the sacrifice of the peace offering, the offering made by fire to the Lord, the fat that covers the timber, and all the fat that is on it, the two kidneys, and fat that is on it, by the flank, and the caul for the liver, the kidney, it shall be taken away. And Aaron's son shall burn it on the altar upon the burnt sacrifice, which is on the wood, that is on the fire, it is offering made by the fire, for a sweet savor unto the Lord.
Okay. So here we see the sacrifice for the peace offering. It says the fat that covers the entrails or the insides, the fat that is on the entrails, the kidneys, and the fat that's on the kidneys, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidneys. He shall remove. Who's he? The person offering, not the priest. Again, yes, just like we talked about in the burnt offerings. This is the person offering is doing all this, not the priest. So the person that's offering this animal, and then this one's cattle, all these things are to be removed from the cattle and given to the priest. And what would the priest do then? Burn them on the burnt altar, yes. So the fat that is around the insides, the kidneys, and the fat that's on the kidneys, and this fatty lobe, which is attached to the liver, which the King James calls it a caul? Is that what you said, Thad? Caul. And if I have it in my notes here somewhere, but of course I can't find it. So if I remember correctly, we only find this Hebrew word 11 times in the Bible, and 9 of the 11 are found in the book of Leviticus when it talks about the caul, or this fatty lobe. And I think the other 2 were in Exodus. I got it here somewhere, but I don't want to go digging for it. So we don't find it real often. It has to do with these sacrifices that were to be made. And we're going to read about it 3 times here in this chapter alone. But so this fatty lobe that was attached to the liver. So all these, again, God was very specific, wasn't he? He wanted the fat around the insides. He wanted the kidneys, both kidneys, and the fat around the kidneys, and this fatty lobe attached to the liver. Very specific. That's what the offer was to remove from the animal and give to the priest to burn on the burnt altar of burnt offering. Michelle, you had a comment?
I was just noticing in verse 1, when it was talking about the burnt offering and the entrails, it doesn't say anything about fat, but it says that they had to wash all of the entrails before it got burned. And this one doesn't say anything about washing.
Right. And the burnt offering, what was left when they got done with the animal? When they offered the burnt offering, what of the animal was left? Burnt it up, right? And here we see something very specific. This is what you're to give to the priest, and this is what you're to offer. Now, there's more details we're going to find out other than this chapter. There's more details given. There's more things to be done to this animal. Okay, and I'm going to try to get through chapter 3, and we'll talk about these other things in chapter 7. But again, I've already mentioned that part of the animal, what's being offered in a peace offering, part of it went to the one offering, part of it went to the priests, and part of it went to God. We just read about the part that goes to God. The fat went to God. When we get into chapter 7, we're going to see part of it went to the offerer and part of it went to the priest. So we'll read about that in chapter 7. Any comments here on the first part? This is the one peace offering for an animal from the herd, a cattle. Could be male or female without blemish. They killed it at the door of the tabernacle. The priest took the blood and sprinkled it around the altar. Then the one offering took all the fat out of it, gave it to the priest, and the priest offered that on the altar. That was the peace offering up to this point. That's the peace offering for one of the herd. Now let's look at Leviticus chapter 6. And we're going to read verses 12 and 13. Leviticus chapter 6, verses 12 and 13. I actually had a question, I'm sorry. In Leviticus 3, verse 5. Before we read this verse in chapter 6, hold your place there, but go back to Leviticus 3 and verse 5. It says, and Aaron's sons shall burn it on the altar upon the burnt sacrifice. Does it not say that? Upon the burnt sacrifice. How will they offer a peace offering on the burnt sacrifice? I couldn't hear you, Tina.
Like mushrooms on a steak.
Let's go to Leviticus 12. It's not a trick question, but Leviticus 6, verses 12 and 13. And Bob, would you read those?
Where we're at,
Leviticus 6, verses 12 and 13.
And the fire upon the altar shall be burning, it shall not be put out, and the priest shall burn wood on it every morning, and lay the burnt offering and odor upon it, and it shall burn thereon the fat of the peace offering. The fire shall ever be burning upon the altar, it shall never go out.
So what was the first thing the priest did in the morning? Put wood in order and did the burnt offering in the morning. So what's the first thing they did in the morning? The burnt offering. So what would any offering after that would have been on top of the burnt offering, right? That's what we're talking about. It's talking about after. Burnt offering is first, and then whatever after that, peace offering, would come later. So in verse 5, when it says, upon the burnt sacrifice, it's talking about after the burnt offering, because it came first. They did a burnt offering in the morning, they did a burnt offering in the evening, and that came first, and then you could do the peace offering. Did I see somebody else with a hand up? Did I miss? No?
Wouldn't it have taken an awful lot of firewood to stand up?
Yes.
It never went out, I never gave that much thought. I have messed with some firewood in my life.
Well, the Levites had to have something to do, didn't they? Well, yeah, again, the priests had the responsibility of doing all this. And what were the Levites to do? They supported the priests, didn't they? So someone supplied them all this firewood. For that wood, that always to be burning, yes, that would have taken a lot of wood. Always kept them busy. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but if I understood it correctly, every morning they got the ashes from the burnt offering. They went and dressed a certain way. God specifically told them, I want you to dress this way, get the ashes, get them all collected up, Take those clothes off and put your regular clothes on. Take the ashes outside of camp every morning. So they had a lot of things they had to do, very specific. There was no question about how God wanted them to do it. Any questions in on as far as a peace offering from the herd up to this point? Go ahead, Chris.
Just an additional thought about them doing this every day. You had the Sabbath day, which was a seventh day rest. If I remember correctly, the priests didn't get a day off like that. I think they worked 7 days a week. The rest of Israel got the Sabbath day off. The work was to be done, but the priests continued to do his duties.
Which meant that the Levites had to plan ahead and make sure the wood, they had plenty of wood for the Sabbath day too, didn't they? They couldn't go out and chop wood. The priests had their job that they had to do, and Jesus brought that up, didn't he? Do the priests work on Saturday, on the Sabbath? When he healed a man on the Sabbath, he brought up the fact that the priests work on the Sabbath, and I just heal a man. What's wrong with that? What Chris is bringing up, Jesus brought up also. But to do so, the Levites would have had to do a lot of work on Friday, so they're ready for Saturday because they couldn't work. Priests could, not the Levites. Okay. Like I said, there's more detail. We're going to find out about this animal later on in chapter 7. But up to this point, this is what God got. Let's move on now and read Leviticus 3 and verse 6. And we're reading this by itself for a reason. Leviticus 3 and verse 6. Carl, would you read that?
And if his offering for a sacrifice of peace offering unto the Lord be of the flock, male or female, he shall offer it without blemish.
Okay, again, if the herd was cattle, what's the flock?
Sheep or goats.
Sheep or goats. Okay, sheep or goats. And here, well, in the burnt offering, flock did mean birds. We don't read about birds here with the with the peace offering. But whether it's sheep or goats, it could also be male or female, right? And the reason I bring that up is, again, if I can find it in my notes. And we're going to read, starting in verse 7, we're going to read about what they call a lamb or a sheep, okay? Starting in verse 7. And then at verse 12, we're going to read about the goats. So it mentions both from the flock, sheep and goats. The reason I read verse 6 by itself is because of the flock meant sheep or goats. And it could be male or female, right? Now, the commentary in my Bible reads like this. In the regulations for offering a goat, the animal sex is not mentioned as it is in the regulation for cattle and sheep. Yes, it is. We just read it. Part of the flock could be male or female. Flock means sheep and goats. So even, you got to watch commentary, right? Because it's not inspired, and it's wrong. We just read it in verse 6. Sheep or goat, that's talking about flock. That's what they are. And they could be male or female. The sex is mentioned in regard to that offering. So I wanted to bring that up. Again, we've talked about that before. If your Bible has commentary, you can read it and see if you can learn from it, but you also got to remember it is not inspired by God, and it can be wrong. Okay, let's continue on and read verses 7 and 8. We're going to talk about the sheep now. Peace offering, and if it's from the sheep. Leviticus 3, verses 7 and 8. Summer, would you read that?
If he offer a lamb for his offering, then shall he offer it before the Lord. And he shall lay his hand upon the head of his offering, and kill it before the tabernacle of the congregation. And Aaron's son shall sprinkle the blood there, round about upon the altar.
Okay. And here, as far as the sheep, we got the same thing, right? He is a lamb without blemish. He'll offer it, and he'll lay his hand on the head and kill it before the tabernacle of meeting, and the priest will sprinkle the blood around on the altar. Just like we read about with the herd. Now let's go ahead and read verses 9 through 11. And this is talking about sheep. Leviticus 3, verses 9 through 11. Stacy, would you read those?
Then he shall offer for the sacrifice of the peace offering as an offering made by fire to the Lord, its fat and the whole fat tail, which he shall remove close to the backbone, and the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat that is on the entrails, the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is on them by the flanks, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidneys he shall remove, and the priest shall burn them on the altar as food, an offering made by fire to the Lord.
Okay, again, the one doing this is the one offering the animal. They're the one that's taking this fat. We see one thing different here with sheep that wasn't part of the cattle. Did you notice what the difference was? The tail, yes. Everything else is the same except for the tail. As far as the sheep, they were to remove the tail, and here it's called fat tail. But according to my studying for class, it said the tail of the Palestinian broad-tailed sheep is almost entirely fat and can weigh more than 16 pounds. So that's why it was offered with the fat, because the tail is fat. So again, it goes along with what we're talking about. So same things, same articles were removed from the animal, except for the tail, as we did from the cattle. And they were given to the priest, and he offered it on the altar. Now let's go on to the goats, verses 12 through 16. And not surprisingly, it's going to read almost identical to the sheep. Leviticus 3, verses 12 through 16. And Hilda, you want to read that? 12 through 16.
He offerings is a goat, and he shall offer it before the Lord. He shall lay his hand on the head and kill it before the tabernacle of meeting, and the sons of Aaron shall sprinkle its blood all around the altar. Then he shall offer it from his offering as an offering made by fire to the Lord. The fat shall cover the entrails of all the fat that is on the entrails, 2 kidneys and fat that is on them by the flank, and the fat laid attached to liver above the kidney he shall remove, and the priest shall burn them on the altar as food, an offering made by fire for a sweet aroma. All the fat is for the Lord.
Okay, now when it comes to the goat, same thing, right? Except for the tail. Same thing as a sheep. They were to take the fat around the insides, the 2 kidneys, the fat that's on the kidneys and the fatty lobe on the liver, remove it and give it to the priest, and they would offer it and burn it on the altar. So we see the same idea. And in case we didn't notice that everything that being offered to God was the fat, that makes it pretty clear at the end of verse 16, doesn't it? All the fat is the Lord's. Merwin, you had a comment?
Well, just where it says in verse 15 and several other verses, the kidneys, the livers, and then at the end it says, it shall he take away. By taking away, that's referring to the fact it's separated and then burned, not disposed of.
Right.
But burned, not separated. Okay.
Right. Yeah, first time I read through it, I will say when I read it, I thought they were taking the fat out of the animal and then they were going to offer the animal. No, they're taking the fat out of the animal. They give the fat, when you read it the way it's supposed to be read correctly, they take the fat and they give it to the priest, and that's what's offered on the altar was the fat, yes. So, but again, we're only reading part of it. This is only part of the peace offering. There's more that's going to be done to these animals than what we're reading about in this chapter, and we're going to get to that in chapter 7. I won't have time this morning. I don't know if Chris will go there Wednesday or if we're just going to wait till we get to 7. But this is only part of what happens with the peace offering. We're reading about the part that goes to God. And we just read in verse 16, all the fat is the Lord's. That's what was offered for the peace offering, the fat of these animals.
You're saying everything of the animal sacrifice is being used.
Well, yeah, most of the time it was. Well, I didn't get where I wanted to, Chris. Big surprise there, but I did want to try to get through chapter 3 where we were one verse short. But anyway, we see here in chapter 3 what God wanted as far as the peace offering. We'll read more about the peace offering in another chapter. So study ahead. I don't know if Chris is going to cover some more of this, or if he's going to move on to chapter 4, if he wants to go to chapter 7. That's all up to Chris. But study ahead so be prepared for Wednesday evening.